God radically changed my family's life before I was born. I always grew up and I always said the last thing I'm ever going to be is a preacher. We're going to speak about life, we're going to speak about leadership, we're going to speak about the Lord's work, and each episode of this podcast we're going to try to tackle, discuss, dig into one thing that will help us not just start right, but finish right. Hey everybody, this is Pastor CT, and I'm here with Travis and Jared, and we appreciate you tuning in to this One Thing podcast, life, leadership, and the Lord's work one thing at a time. We're just discussing and digesting the things about life and leadership and the Lord's work or ministry one thing at a time, and we hope that it's been a blessing to you so far. I hope these podcasts, whether you're watching it on YouTube or wherever you're listening from, our prayer and our hope is that it's adding value to your life and that it's helping you with some things we've said to maybe navigate through life or leadership or the Lord's work. And so we talked about friendship this morning, and we came back, and we're going to do another one today, and I appreciate y'all being in town for this.
Absolutely.
To talk about evangelism.
Oh, yeah.
In 2023, one of the biggest requests we've got, people emailing in, is about evangelism. But before we dive into that, let's kill some light stuff. Who we rooting for in football? Jared?
Man, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah.
Raised in South Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mix in South Georgia, but I got to hold true, and I'm a Gator man.
He's a Gator man.
Yep.
Does
it's
that
rough
you,
right
does
now.
That, does that cause you some flack being in Georgia and not rooting for Georgia?
When you get out of South Georgia, it does for sure. North Georgia, even up middle Georgia.
Yeah.
I mean, everything's Bulldog. But
Yeah.
down there, it's 50-50. Even into Florida, there's still, like Jacksonville area, North Florida area, there's a lot of Bulldog fans even there.
Yeah.
So
I guess I know what you are.
Oh, yes. So the only football team, really, we have no pro sports in West Virginia. So even if I would move tomorrow, I still am a diehard Mountaineer fan.
Yeah.
WVU.
Well, if any team was playing against West Virginia, I would root for West Virginia.
Sure.
It's in my blood. But I guess traveling, and I have lived down south now as long, if not longer, than I lived in West Virginia.
Ain't
which
that
is
something?
so weird to me. So I lived here for a long time, and Augusta is split between South Carolina Gamecocks to our east and then the Georgia Bulldogs
Right.
to our west. And then we went to Asheville and then to Anderson for a while. So Tucker grew up in school, and all of his friends were Clemson Tiger fans.
Right.
And that was like at the top of their dynasty, right, when they were winning everything.
Oh, yeah.
So I ain't going to lie, it was cool to be in that town. You'd go to a restaurant, the players would be there. And so there is a fondness to watching Clemson. But if Clemson played West Virginia, I would still root for West Virginia.
Right.
But now that I'm here, there are very few Clemson fans. And it's really split between Carolina Gamecocks and Georgia Bulldogs. And I really don't have an axe to grind with it.
You're not joining one or the other.
But I do know
if the pastor of Victory did join one, would the people of Victory
he cannot say
give him
If
flack?
you
picked one today, would they give you flack on Sunday?
When I first started pastoring, I stayed away from the Gamecocks and the Bulldogs by just saying I like Clemson and West Virginia.
Yeah.
And when we do events and stuff, I would put a Clemson Tigers tent up, But I will say the vast majority of this church are Georgia Bulldog fans.
Yeah.
And I have found myself praying at times, Lord, please let the Bulldogs win, because if they lose this game, church is going to be terrible tomorrow.
That's right. That's
But
right.
what's funny is your sound guy is a huge Carolina fan, and I've been in church before and him hit the rooster crowing button up there in the
He's got a
soundboard.
button in the sound booth, and anytime somebody talks about it, if they mention Bulldogs, he'll hit the rooster sound. And it just,
That's crazy.
Yeah. Which one of y'all think is the best hunter?
Well, now I don't think we want to give anybody else that
I'm not even in the topic because, man, I've killed one deer in the past 6 years.
That's because you've dove full-fledged into coon hunting.
Yeah, I lost my deer hunting. No, this year I wanted to. I had full desire to go out and just wreak havoc, tag out deal. And first sit there in the stand, here comes a pile of deer, and I'm like, I'm waiting on the big one. Just that old blood just rose up in me again. So I'm not a trigger happy guy. I'd rather sit and wait.
At all this year?
Yeah. I didn't get to go one time in South Carolina because of my schedule. The week I was home and planned on going, I was either rained out or a few last-minute deal.
This was my favorite turkey season of all time.
I killed two in Kentucky.
South Carolina was on fire turkey season.
Yeah.
I will say this. Outside, I do enjoy what the Lord allows me to do. I do. A hobby, I guess it's a hobby, but I really love hunting. Like, it is something that I could do all the time.
You remember when we was kids and we went squirrel hunting behind that church?
Oh, yes.
This guy, he was a dear friend of ours. Vince Buttons was his name.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us permission to hunt. There were so many squirrels on this hillside behind this church in Pinch, West Virginia. And we drove up there, got up there before daylight, and we got up on that mountaintop. And, man, it was like a squirrel carnival. They was everywhere, jumping from limb to limb.
Oh,
and, man, we were like, pow, pow, pow. Well, we was chasing them squirrels all over the place to where we quit looking down, and we was just, and I'll never forget, I shot a squirrel, and we heard somebody start yelling at us. And we had been so far back in the woods, we got near to a subdivision, like a community.
Oh, man.
And we were raining down
Just
pellets on
peppering.
these people's houses. And some dude ran up his house Saturday morning, 8 a.m., yelling at us, "Get out of here, you're hitting our house," yada, yada, yada. So we took off running, trying to hide. And little did we know that preacher Vince Buttons was hunting too. And we're in this, like where an old tree had fell down and created this little thing. We're down there hiding from the dude that's yelling at us, only to turn around and Vince Buttons and one of his deacons like, "Hey, boys, what y'all doing?" Yeah. He had his gun, big old man.
Oh, yeah.
And we were like, we ain't doing nothing. Y'all shoot that guy's house. No, sir. No, we didn't. No. And later on in life, I went back and said, "Hey, God's convicted me about this. We did actually hit that house, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lie to you. We were scared to death,
Yeah.
But some of the best memories, I know we do turkey hunts and deer hunts. Jonathan McNeese and different guys. When I met John Anderson, he never hunted at all. He was a big golfer, and he said, "If you'll learn how to golf,
I'll learn
I'll start turkey hunting with you."
Yeah.
And now I'm hooked to golf, and he's hooked to turkey hunting.
Yeah.
So I do find it to be a good release, a good way to get away, and I've always enjoyed the great outdoors and getting out there with God's creation. So,
oh yeah,
I guess that ties into evangelism, because you go, and you have to have something to unplug.
Absolutely.
And clear your mind. I know, like at the peak of me in evangelism, when I started like going 5, 6, 7 weeks at a time, and I started having anxiety attacks and started struggling. That's one thing my doctor said, you got to find a hobby. Like you've got to
a release. Yeah.
You got to have a light at the end of the tunnel. You got to be able to have a place to release. And so whether it's fly fishing in West Virginia, which we're doing in a couple of weeks, right, or whether we're turkey hunting in Tennessee with all the guys, or whether we're deer hunting in Kentucky, I've always enjoyed it. And if you're somebody that is watching or listening and
have a trout stream behind your house,
or if you hate hunting, just turn this podcast off. And if you're somebody that has a lot of land or a big farm that you would need deer taken off or turkeys taken off, the church number is 803-278-2138. I would love
give a call.
Yeah, or have a nuisance problem.
I would love to minister to your family and help in that way, right?
Absolutely.
That's right.
info@cttownsend.com. Just send me an address and we'll come check it out.
We're always looking for land.
Put a plug in here too. We talked about hunting being our release, and there's other things. Some go to the gym. Some go to the gym as their release.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be wise, someone that watches this, and maybe you are going. You need to find something.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about hunting, just to kind of break the ice, but you probably need to find something in your life that does help you release and helps you unwind and helps you de-stress.
Yeah, some guys,
just like
simple as building. Some guys love carpentry work. Some guys love mechanic, body
Some guys
work.
like to read.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
Sure.
I know several preachers, they don't have outdoor type of hobbies. They love reading. Okay, then take a couple of days and take your family up the mountains and take 5 books with you.
Yeah.
Yep.
what is the old saying? The preacher you say you got to come
You got to
apart.
come apart before you fall,
Fall apart.
Hey,
Hey,
but
man.
it's so true. It literally is so true. And it took years of traveling before really I probably ever got there to that
Yeah.
point.
Well, the danger is you eventually keep pouring until there's nothing left. And then you just start going through the routine.
And you don't know how low that tank's getting
Yeah.
until it's too late.
You preaching the same stuff, and it's got old to you, and it's old to them, and
Been there.
it's hard to be creative in chaos. And when it's just go, 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 and there's never a time to refill.
Mm.
And I think also for evangelism, you stay booked, but and we'll get into this. I don't want to get ahead of it, but I think staying attached to your local church and to your pastor is vital there to stay grounded. But
I think that kind of leads us really into the first question, which I'll ask is so we're talking about what we need to remember what we're even doing. Like, what's the goal? What's the purpose? So first question for you two I have is, what's the primary purpose? Like, what is the goal? What is the purpose for the role of the evangelist specifically?
Defined, an evangelist is the proclaimer of the gospel, and just as earlier the podcast about friends, where the terminology, the defining of friend is misconstrued. I think in 2023, the terminology for an evangelist gets misconstrued. I think sometimes nowadays, anybody who is not a pastor labels themselves as an evangelist.
Right.
And I don't agree with that.
Right.
Like Steve Hurt, my father-in-law, he always taught us in Bible college, people would say, how do I know if I'm an evangelist? And Steve Hurt said, well, evangelism is really simple. Your phone is ringing or it's not. You know what I mean?
He still says that.
Evangelism is not me working this phone. Hey,
Right.
can I come preach for you? Can I come preach for you?
Amen.
Like my dad taught me, when I was all growing up, especially after I started preaching, that God will direct those paths.
Amen.
You know what I mean? And you don't want to create doors and walk through those doors.
Yeah.
I have never one time in my life picked that phone up and hey, can I come? I've had people say, if you're passing through, call me.
Sure.
I've done that.
And there's a difference.
Yes.
So an evangelist is a proclaimer of the gospel, to preach the gospel. 2 Timothy 4:5, do the work of an evangelist and make full proof of thy ministry. Biblically, Ephesians 4:11 says, and he gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. So we know biblically there is an office of an evangelist. And so I think it does us good to define what that is and to biblically, to challenge the believer, to encourage fellow pastors, go where God puts you. It does have the formalism of traveling to different places. Paul on his missionary journeys went all over the place, spreading the gospel. And all of us today are a result of him traveling and preaching the gospel to those corners of the world. And so we would call them missionary journeys, but there's also evangelistic natures of that. Jared, you've talked about, we know different men that are quote unquote evangelistic, that some of them seems like their primary purpose is encouraging saints, where they very rarely ever give a gospel message or a gospel invitation, and there's not a large harvest of sinners saved. That doesn't mean that's wrong, right? There's a need for that. There's been many meetings that I've preached in my life where by Monday night I realized this is not going to be a crusade.
Right.
This is not even going to be an exciting revival.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's dry in here. And so I would set my sail to, number one, be faithful to the Word of God. And number two, if my 3, 4, 5 days here accomplish nothing but encouraging that pastor and his wife, and maybe encouraging them in such a way where they can walk another mile, I leave with feeling like I succeeded.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So there are men that it seems like their gift is exhortation or encouragement in those areas, and there's also men that we've seen that do have the gift of evangelism or evangelistic nature,
evangelizing,
to where no matter what text they really preach from, it's going to end up at Calvary,
Right.
and there's going to be this, a draw,
Strong draw.
and I think we celebrate all of it and understand God
Right.
uses different people and different giftings. But that would be my.
Yeah.
You
That's
guys-
great. And with that, Jared, too, let me ask you just the same question, but a little bit different angle, because we was talking about with the evangelism he had mentioned, well, Brother Steve Hurt did, but Pastor CT had mentioned, your phone's ringing or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So God opens doors, right? God opens doors, closes doors. So as a new guy, right, wanting to be an evangelist or whatever, if God is doing that in his life, it looks like God has enough control to do that in a person's life. Speak on the availability of a young man, or we call it faithfulness in the church world, but the availability, where does he need to be? Like with that phone calling, go where God puts you, right? So God's in charge of the things behind the scene. I think it'd be important maybe for a young guy, for somebody, because I get texts like this even all the time, believe it or not, and asking, what do I do? What's the first step? Speak on that availability, or what should a young guy that's just trying to serve God, how does he operate in the early season of ministry?
You want my first thought, or do you want my biblical answer to that?
Give both.
Both.
I'm sure they're both good.
Okay. So I surrendered to preach at 19, October 5th. And, man, when I was in that altar, it was like the spirit of Billy Kelly, Billy Graham, Billy Sunday. We'll just stay with Billy's. But all of those great preachers, I was like, man, I just got all of their mantles. I'm fixing to go save the world. We all felt that way when we finally surrendered. We've been running for so long. Or maybe y'all didn't, but I did.
Sure.
But I mean, like, I come up ready. Let's do it. Let's go get somebody saved. If that'll let me preach, them people that's been holding on,
yeah.
I'll get them saved. Them ones that's been causing
Everybody's
trouble,
gonna love me.
they either gonna get right or get out when I'm done with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But this is what I found out. I surrendered to preach, and it was like, okay, first thing you're actually gonna do is sit on that pew and be quiet for about a year,
Yeah.
and you ain't gonna say nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I got something to say. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
And if you want to see the biblical application of that, you'll find it in one of the greatest prophets that ever lived. When God called Elijah, the man that can call fire from heaven, the man that literally is fixing to resurrect a dead child, a man that's going to cast his mantle on another young man, him do twice the miracles that Elijah ever did. First thing God ever does for him is calls him to a brook Cherith and separates him and gets him alone so God can feed him and fill him.
Yeah. And so even at the brook Cherith, God put him there.
God sent him there.
Like, God, be where God puts you.
Yes.
That's where he stayed until God made the call. So even in Elijah's life, he was just available.
Yeah.
He was hanging out by the brook. Whether he liked it or not, still God's man.
God gave him everything he needed for his ministry at that brook. And without the separation, without God's supply at that place, he would have never been able to send him. So what we have to pay attention to, even now, 13 years later in ministry, and whether or not you're 13 or 20 years or 2 weeks surrendered to preach, you have to understand that sometimes God takes us back to the brook so we can be refilled and, get what we were talking about, But it's that small step with God and the willingness to go somewhere you might not want to go.
Yeah.
And sometimes I even, I've preached it too. God supplied all Elijah's need. He used them ravens to feed him there. Well, think about it in this aspect too. Lord, is this where I'm really supposed to be? Because the blackbirds are the one that's bringing me food.
Yeah. Who wants
I'm
to
out
eat
here
a
all-
piece of flesh that a bird just dropped out of his
Yeah,
mouth?
I'm all alone over here on the backside of the River Jordan. This ain't no fun. It's not fun. But if you want to kneel down in front of 450 prophets of Baal in just a little while and prove the true God of Israel, you better be willing to go get along with him.
Yeah. A
I'm
call
with
to preach is a call to prepare. And I think, when God, look, God calling me to preach was as strong of an event in my life and memory
Oh, man.
as salvation was.
Yeah, you remember it the
Oh,
same.
absolutely.
Remember it the same. No
Look
doubt.
here, listen.
Yeah.
I mean, hair standing on, just think like God, and I did ask him to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I don't want to walk around guessing. You know, I tell people I've doubted my salvation before. I ain't never doubted God called me to preach.
Yeah.
I've
Not
heard
one
many,
time.
many preachers have
Yeah.
heard them say it.
And so I think the call to preach, like I know God called me to preach. I do not remember a time where God said, I want you to go into evangelism. You know, like there was never it was doors opening,
That's right.
right?
Yes.
Like I remember when I went to Preacher Brown, I said, Preacher, I need you to pray for me. You know, I just really feel like God's calling me into evangelism. And Preacher Brown, he didn't like it. You know, everybody that came out of here went and started churches. Preacher was big on church planting. And I remember thinking, I've got to go to Charleston, or I got to go to Columbia and start a church, or, you know, because that's what everybody had done. And so I was really the first one. And I said, Preacher, I really feel like God's called me to evangelism. And he said, son, you're going to starve to death. You know, you know, yada, yada, yada. And, you know, you're not good at it, yada, 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 yada. And he, you know, he was not concerned how you felt about it. He was going to tell you what he thought. And, you know, and man, it was such a hard situation because I respect my man of God and in his opinion. You know, it was years later. We were in a meeting together somewhere preaching. He put his hand on my leg. He said, I just want you to know that you'll never understand how proud I am of you. He said, back in the day when I told you, he said, I just didn't want to lose you. He said, I loved you and Becky being in the church.
Yeah.
And he said, that was my fault, not yours. You know, so God opening those doors, you know, and we got to move on here, but
Yeah.
I think you got to go where God puts you, and that whole calling and the opportunity is not going to start off and you know, you're going to pay your dues.
Yeah. You're not going to start out preaching 75 meetings a year.
No.
You know.
When I started out by faith, Preacher Brown he said, okay. He said, you start.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and when you're gone, that's fine. He said, and when you're not booked, you can come back here and work. I was back at
Absolutely.
this church. I vacuumed these carpets where I pastor today. I cleaned the toilets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have at one point in time in my life vacuumed every square inch of this entire auditorium, served here happily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm, you know, Preacher Brown many times, you want to preach behind a pulpit? I'd love to. But he was a stickler. We'll go preach in the jails on Sunday and go preach in the nursing home or the rescue mission. And he pushed us out constantly to learn to preach. He said, you're not going to learn to preach in the lights. You learn to preach. Yeah. And so we were faithful in the small things, you know, and other things, you know, it was by faith.
Yeah.
I would look at my calendar at March, and I might have had one or two things booked. But I would get to the end of March looking back, and it was miraculous, you know. So and then it starts, you know, you'd preach here and you'd preach there and you'd meet this guy and you meet that guy, and God would start connecting the dots, you know, and you don't ever get past that, you know. And if there's one thing I could challenge you, Travis, you're starting out in this, and, you know, I don't ever get to the place where you overlook the smaller church and think, well, I would rather have the bigger church. Number one, I have found that smaller church will take better care of your family. You'll build better relationships there, whereas the big church will make it feel like that it's a blessing to you that they let you come there.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so the heart of America are those little churches all across America that there's faithful pastors in there that have just been preaching for years. And so God opens those doors, and we don't ever need to get past or get over the people that helped us.
Yeah.
You know, today I'm in a quandary because the church is growing. My dad's sick. I'm in a different season of life. Everybody in my circle is saying, you got to slow down. You know, but my fear is I don't want any of those pastors that took care of my family and loved my family when I was full-time on the road to think, well, CT feels like he has arrived and he doesn't want to come. You know, in my mind, you know, I never called a preacher to ask if I could come.
Right.
I never set a price, you know, well, I'll come for this much money. Still don't.
And I think that's a self-inflicted thought. I don't think anybody ever thinks that.
Yeah. But So that, evangelism is the proclaimer of the gospel. And I think we must be faithful to that. And no matter what I'm preaching or where I'm preaching, by the end of it, I want to wrap up at the cross
We
somewhere.
meet at the Calvary.
And I want to give people an opportunity to respond to the gospel.
Yeah.
Yes, I may tell a story to engage them. Yes, I may be funny. Yes, I may,
Sure.
but at the end of it, I want every single one of those to circle back around, end at the cross, and give somebody a chance, because I believe that when a building's full of people, God can save anybody, anywhere, anytime. And I don't want to go to heaven with that blood on my hands that I did not give them an opportunity
Sure.
to come to Christ.
Dragging that.
When you are doing the work of an evangelist for younger guys, and I hate even saying stuff like this because I feel like I am the young guy, remember who you are and where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
You're not that pastor
Yeah,
of that church.
right.
It is not my job, and I'll just say me for references because I don't want to point my finger at you two or anybody else. It's not my job to show up at a church 1 week out of the year and think that I'm fixing to fix them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Who am I
Yeah.
Yeah.
to think I figured this congregation out in Sunday morning and Sunday night and come in there Monday night and rip them apart
Yeah.
and tell them all to get right with God, and preacher needs to do that and pastor needs to do that? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Now, if you'll go in and preach the word of God expositorily,
Mm-hmm.
preach it the way God is contextually,
The Bible can cut.
it will preach. And if it needs to be given, I've preached on certain things before, and somebody going to me like, "Brother, Darren, you got on my toes tonight." And I'm thinking, how?
The
You know
word
what I
of
mean?
God did. Yeah.
The word.
Well, the Ephesians 4:11, and he gave
Yeah.
some.
Yeah.
When I give you something, what's that called?
It's a gift.
It's a gift.
That's a gift.
And so an evangelist is a gift to the local church.
Yes.
And I don't think an evangelist should be a bomb to the local church.
Nope.
Right?
No.
Right.
I don't think the evangelist should be a whipping post
Nope.
for the local church. I have never felt like when I get called or given an opportunity to go serve at a church or a pastor that it's my job to go fix everything.
We're
Now,
not.
let's
We're not
agree.
shearing the sheep.
Let's agree
That's right.
that I'm preaching so many different churches and many different kinds of churches that there are places I go and, man, I would not be doing that, or I would not be doing this, or, look, I'm not the pastor of that church. I have to give an account for what I do in that time frame I'm there, and that's to preach the gospel.
So many rabbits.
Don't run to rabbits. Let's move
Hey,
on.
let's go to the
move
next
on.
one. Okay.
Yeah.
What is the biggest challenge traveling throughout your year? What's your big, whether it's in ministry, home, family? All
Sure.
that. What
Let's
do you
rapid
feel like
fire.
some
Let's do
biggest-
shorter versions of this and let's get through these. So,
Sure. I believe the hardest part for me, of course, now there's a difference between starting out, and then being established later on. Starting out, I've noticed one of the hardest parts is when we talked about some struggling things, remembering the small beginnings. When I started in evangelism, I was working odd jobs. Like I would paint a house. I would paint a house and then go preach. I would come home and paint until I got another meeting. Those were hard times. Those were hard times going with, without, and you insurance and all those things starting out. That was a challenge to okay, God, am I preaching or am I painting? And just staying, whatever God you have for me, I'll just stay here.
Am I called or am I crazy?
And then as you as you travel, and I've noticed even God was the one that blessed me with the painting appointments too. But
Right,
anyway,
sure.
when you travel, I think the hardest part for me being older. So I'm 41. I've got 3 kids and a wife, and started evangelism in my late 30s. So I had a full life already ahead of me. One of my hardest times traveling is just being without. A lot of times like April's, springs are super busy. There'll be days there where there's some days where you haven't seen the family in a while. You're gone 3-4 days, home 2, and then stuff. So sometimes the traveling, just the being away part sometimes can be a challenge, trying to raise kids. When they're young, it's a little bit easier. As they get older, they want to ride motorcycles. We homeschool. So there's a lot of things there that require attention. And sometimes it's hard to try to have a balance to where you're still dad, taking care of those things, still husband, and still the gift to the church.
Yep.
In a nutshell, that's the hardest part for me.
I think family, I think balance is by far I keep having conversations with the office, how much is too much. Now, my kids are in school now and they don't get to travel with me near as much. So over the years, the biggest balance for me is I don't want to try to win the world and lose my family, so trying to balance that. And really, we were at a huge crossroads when God sent us here to pastor this church, because Tucker, we tried the whole homeschooling thing at our house. It didn't work. Not at our house. Me and Becky was either going to kill each other or the kids. And we thought, so that we don't go to jail, we need to send these kids to school. And so we sent Tucker at the time in Anderson to Brother Steve's school there at Temple. And me and Becky were traveling. We found ourselves, man, we were only home like 5 days a month, so we was like, we're going to live our life without Tucker. And I remember the year before we came here, we were like, what are we going to do? Like when Siler starts school next year, what are we going to do? And that's when the Lord opened this door. So I look back and I see the sovereignty of God in place.
Right.
That my family is more important to God than even it is to me.
Right.
Right.
Oh, that's good.
God does not want me to sacrifice my family.
Yeah. He remembers who he ordained first.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and I had friends when this door opened, man, don't do it. Don't go. Stay in evangelism because it benefited them, right? Sure. And don't go. But to me and Becky, it was the open door. We had conversations about it, but I never thought in a million years that I would really be the one to come back here and pastor. And probably you remember conversations I was talking where I said I wouldn't do it, because I so enjoyed evangelism. I mean, God's opening doors everywhere and preaching to thousands of people and, all this stuff.
He knew the right season.
But when this door opened, because of the challenge that we were dealt with, God gave me a situation here where I could do what I'm called to do and at the same time protect my family. And that's my fear for both of you. I've talked to you both about that, that your family's important. And I have said in one breath, if I knew 10 years ago what I know about pastoring now, I would have done this earlier. Because I feel like, number one, I'm more effective when I'm preaching in a church because I kind of know what that pastor's going through somewhat now. I know the pressures, and at the same time, I'm fresher because I'm not traveling every day of my life, and I'm constantly developing new sermons for here at the church, and so I'm fresher than I used to be. But at the same time, when I say I would do it earlier, that door wasn't open. I wasn't ready for that door 10 years ago.
And they wasn't either here.
Yeah. I mean, Preacher Brown said when the Burlington revival hit, he said, he talked about how the church, he was so proud and how that was a situation that kind of like when God elevated Moses and I as the people, that was a situation where I went from the young preacher boy that was out of here to where Preacher Brown said he actually started thinking, man, I bet CT could do, in the fullness of time with God's will.
And he gives grace through that. He gives grace through those seasons and difficulties in lives when you would wish it'd be this way.
I think any evangelist would say the balance of life.
That's me. That's the common denominator. And it's a, sub points for the one thing, but, y'all have hit enough, but I'm the same way. Balance of finance, family, faith.
Yeah.
What do you say, Jared, to the statement of people that have never done it? That, you evangelists just live a full-time vacation.
I've often thought about many.
Come tell me that when it's time to pay my bills. I'm still the new guy in this. Come tell me that when the bills are due. Because that's not reality.
No.
I believe my hardest thing right now really is, you said finances,
family
and faith. Is finances right now. And I didn't want to bring that up, but I mean it's true.
No.
It's not a vacation. It's not. No, there's a lot of grinding. There's a lot of begging God to make a way. They said, well, how do you keep your wife happy when she's at home and you travel? Because we got an autistic son. You know that. And, well, they don't. So I got special needs at home. There's a lot different things in my life than some other evangelists we know. And how do you keep her happy? I said, as long as the card works when she swipes it, she's pretty happy. So it is a reality that the bills got to be paid. Shoes got to be on the kids. right? God said he'd give you shelter, clothes, food. You know, those things he's given me the ability to try to provide for my family. So.
I remember walking through it feeling like it was hard, but looking back now, I see miraculous.
Come on.
You know, like I remember the days when we were like, man, what are we going to do? How are we going to keep traveling? We kept hiring other people, and people started traveling with us. And, you know, you ran with me for a while, and then you got booked up and busy, and then others ran with me, you know, and I'm thankful for all that. But I remember, like, thinking, well, we need an RV. You know, we got babies. You know, the best of hotels are nasty. You know, like, you uncover stuff. So,
I get it.
Like, we started thinking, and we started praying for, like, impossible. There was no way I could go buy an RV, right? Like, it's too much money.
Right.
I could not even afford to maintain it, you know, and in the miraculous ways of how God, you know, on a New Year's Eve service a church gave us, he didn't even know we've been praying for it, and got up in front of his church and said, I feel like God's laid us to do this, and pretty much almost paid for an RV for us, you know. And Tucker, for the next year, when we get off that bus and go to a church, Tucker would look at Pastor and say, you want to know where we got that bus? Said every night me and Daddy would pray for God to give us a bus, and God, you know.
Yeah.
And so what looked like hard in the moment, I look back with incredible fondness.
That's encouragement to me.
Of looking back to see how God
Absolutely
built us and transitioned us.
Right.
And what looked like a challenge on the road, looking back, is a celebration of how God brought us through all of that.
That's encouraging me because I'm there, you know. I'm there in my life. Just the other day, my wife, and so everybody says, oh, they got an RV, or oh, they got a bus. Well, now that I'm in it, you see the family's so separated. They're in and out of hotels. Well, now they can have a home away from home, a place where they can. Anyway, it was a great God's blessing, and God continues. I've even got stuff on my phone I write down, miracles in the past already, where without God it would have never happened. Yeah. And so that leads us to something, the next question. It could be funny, I don't know, but what's the craziest evangelistic experience? So I guess with your travels, with your preaching and all those things, of your journeys, your evangelistic journeys, right? So you talked about Paul traveling. That's what you all do. That's what we do. So what is the craziest thing that's happened from church to the road that you can remember?
Man, I actually should have asked if I could tell a story, because I don't know if it's too rough or not. But there's a lot of them for sure. But I was preaching one time, and this pastor, I didn't know him. He said, you know, let's go somewhere. So we go, and he takes me to a little place. He's got some sheep, and he pulls up in his pasture, and there's a donkey there, and he gets his phone out, and he calls this guy on the phone. He said, hey, man, he said, I thought I told you to get that donkey out of my pasture. He said, that thing's been killing my sheep, which they will do, you know. And he said, that thing's been killing my sheep. He said, man, he said, I've done told you. So this is a two-way conversation. I don't hear one side. Well, I done told you. I told you what I was going to do. Well, sure enough, this pastor gets his rifle out and takes his donkey out.
Oh, man.
I'm sitting there thinking, oh, Lord, he calls him back. No, matter of fact, excuse me, he left the phone on. He said, I told you I was going to do. You know, there he goes. And he gets the phone. He's like, yeah, that's exactly what you just heard. And he's like, well, I'm on my way. He gets off the phone. He said, Brother Jared, I'm sorry. He said, we got to go take care of this. He said, it's fixing to get ugly. And that guy calls him back. Man, he's raising Cain on the other end. And he's like, well, how big of a boy are you?
Yeah.
You know, type of thing.
Right.
And he's like, Brother Jared, you all right? You mind? He's like, you just stay in truck. He said, but if I holler for you, he said, you mind getting my back? And I'm like, what have I got myself into?
Yeah.
Man, we pull down this dude's driveway, and I'm thinking he's going to be standing there waiting on him. And that preacher pulls over the side, and he looks at me and starts laughing his head off. And he said, man, did you really think you was in a mess? I said, absolutely I did. And turns out it was his son-in-law's donkey, and the thing was poor, and they had to take it out, you know. So this pastor was not riding around killing somebody's animal, you know.
That's pretty good.
That was just a way of him putting it out of his misery and putting a little heart attack inside me.
You're
But
right.
I mean,
people love to play pranks on us.
oh, yeah, yeah.
By far the craziest. I was preaching for Jonathan in Columbus, Georgia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And great week, Sunday through Wednesday, got done. I load all the sound equipment up. We load the trailer. We get in the car, and we got to drive all the way home that night. I pulled out of the church, get on the main road, and behind me, blue lights come behind me, and y'all know me. I'm
Oh,
a
yeah.
hypochondriac,
You worried.
and I'm scared to death going to jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I get pulled over, and I got them 10 and 2, and I'm like, man, I just pulled on the road. What in the world? He said your tag's expired on the back, yada yada yada, and he starts getting all this stuff, and he goes back there and he comes back, Mr. Townsend, I need you to get out of the car, put your hands against the car, all this stuff, and I'm like, what? What in the world? Tucker's in the back, Daddy, you going to jail? All this stuff, and I'm like, what in the world? So I've been pulled over a bunch of times, but I ain't never told me to get out of the car.
Right.
And he said, he puts my hands against the car and frisks me down, searches me. You got any guns on you? You got any drugs? I said, you can literally turn around and see the church from where we were, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm embarrassed. I'm thinking, man, there's people that are watching this. What do they think's going on? And he said, Mr. Townsend, when I ran your stuff, there's a warrant for your arrest in such and such place. And they have told me to take you in, and they'll figure it out when you get in there. And I'm like, my mind's running. Did I not pay a ticket? Did I? What am I getting in trouble for?
Taxes
what in the world
overdue.
have I done? I'm being arrested for preaching the gospel. I've made some politician mad, or what in the world have I done?
You figured to be a martyr.
And the whole time I can hear that as they handcuff me and take me to the car, I can hear Tucker, Daddy, don't go to jail. I mean, I'm like mortified.
I'm actually at this meeting.
Were you there?
Yeah, I was there. And in another car, I can hear Tucker crying and hollering, Daddy. So this ain't made up stuff. This
So
is
I'm
for
like,
real.
I'm in panic mode, brother. And so they put me in the back of this cop car, and I'm sitting there handcuffed, and I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, what in the world have I done? What I'm trying to think, did Becky do something I don't know, but what in the world's going on? And about 10 minutes goes by. Well, it felt like an eternity.
Right.
And all of a sudden, the middle partition window of that cop car opens up, and there's Jonathan Menese's face. He said, I forgot to give you your love offering, and this sheriff goes to my church. I told him to stop you so I could give you your love offering. And find out it's all a prank all along that they had set it up.
That's pretty good.
And really, you would think I would hate Jonathan and been mad at Jonathan, but I was just so glad that I
wouldn't go.
Yeah, that it wasn't going to jail.
But that's by far.
Awesome.
I hope nobody has to live that. What's the next one? Jared,
Let's see here. Where are we at? That's the craziest thing.
Number 6.
Okay, so,
Number 4.
What has been the highlight of your experience as an evangelist so far?
Travis, you go first on that. You've been short at it. You got any highlight you consider to be a highlight for you?
Well, so that we talked about, the role and purpose really evangelism, is to preach the gospel. Is there a highlight when it comes to preaching the gospel? And man, it's hard to nail it down to just one. I remember recently we was in just a regular 4-day meeting at a church, and the Lord saw fit to extend it, for 3 weeks, and people were getting saved and lives were getting changed, and just 2 different parts there's so many parts to that meeting back in March, but I remember one time they come down, we was just having an altar call, and they did another call for salvation, sang another verse, and so a lady and a daughter and her mom came to the altar, and they was praying, and this is when the revival. This was in the first few days, and this is when it really changed from just an average normal meeting to, man, God's really moving here. And so the pastor met them down at the altar, and he said he went down there to pray with the teenager, and she looks up. He said, how can I help you? And she looks up, tears all in her eyes, and she said, I need to be saved. Well, he was so overwhelmed by this moment, the preacher, that he just lets out a pray, woo, glory to God. And he runs down the center aisle, leaves her at the altar. Of course, his wife, she's, it's a lady, she's coming to deal with her, so it's not, but he leaves her, and he's just excited that, God is on the move. And so that began, I remember it, man, it changed everything. And even the people seeing the rejoice, the enjoyment in the pastor, it so affected them that we was like, wow, God is doing something different here, something special here, which led us from that moment God led us 3 weeks, which I'll bring us up to the very last day of those 3 weeks. And you guys have been in these meetings, and of course, everything y'all have done, God's been able to, bless. And so you know what it's like to be carrying on, and then God start to drop it down. So we was reaching into that meeting, and then at the very last night, and we were sure God was finished and done. We was going to preach that Friday. The very last night, a new visitor had showed up to that meeting. He was a 61-year-old man, same age as when my dad passed away. 61-year-old man named Pete. Pete came for the first night. It went 3 weeks. It was his first night, the very last night he came. And at the very end, we did the invitation and everything. And I said, I just want to drag the net one more time. And that 60-year-old man named Pete walked the aisle at the end of that meeting. And I was I think that was so exciting. What a miracle it is for anyone to get saved, but for a grown man, 61,
Last
show up.
night.
To me, that was an experience I'll never forget.
Yeah.
And that's a great aspect of it. Like, of course, man, what's the highlight, the biggest thing? I'm going to run to Burlington, Golden Creek, where we met.
Oh, yeah.
Extended meetings. The Lord's let me preach a couple of them. One where the guy took the donkey out. That one got extended. And
I think I know where that was.
yeah, another close to my hometown before me and Jennifer was even married, had a meeting get extended there. And those are all great. But when it comes down to it, highlights can be moments
Yeah.
in a service.
Sure.
We had a moment at one of the first camps in Gatlinburg, and me and Jennifer and him and Becky, we all locked arms and got in the altar and, begged God for some big things. And every now and then I'll run across that picture in my roll,
I remember that
on my
meeting.
phone, and a little moment like that is a huge highlight.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
From that place, we've been on them mountains and in them valleys. But I look back and I say, but God's been faithful, you know.
Yeah.
Just last week I was preaching at a meeting. I don't even know, the guy didn't even come talk to me afterwards. Don't know his name, don't know where he's from. And I preached on Job that night. First time I even preached a sermon. And one of the men in the church came. They said, who was that down there praying? They said, we don't know. So we went down there and prayed with him. He said, I've been away from God. He said, I was an assistant pastor. He said, but tonight I'm coming back. And man, hey, thank God for moments when you get to preach to 1,000 or 2,000.
Yeah.
But if a guy that I don't even know
Sure.
said, I've been away for a while, but I'm coming back.
Yeah.
That's a highlight.
Oh, yeah.
Amen.
And that's worth the troubles, and that's worth the trials, and
It is.
the being gone.
We had a guy not long ago. We had a meeting, and another pastor from a local place had brought some of his men to that meeting. We was given the invitation, and he was dressed suit and tie, came with the pastor. He was his ministry, a music director. He was his choir director, and so he brought him. They all came to the meeting. Well, during the altar call, I thought he was coming to pray with us for God to save or for God to move. Well, he grabbed his pastor on the way. Him and his pastor hit the altar before I'm even done preaching. That man got saved.
Oh.
I didn't know it, but he grabbed his pastor to pray, had him lead him to the Lord. I was up on stage talking to the pastor. That man walked up and said, I need to talk to you. I said, is everything okay? He said, brother, I've been in ministry my whole life. He said, my dad was a preacher. I've tried to preach, and I could never preach. He said, I've tried to sing, and I could never sing. He said, I'm the music leader at our church. And he said, and I just got saved tonight.
Wow.
He said, I've been trying to do it, and I never had no power. And never had the Lord.
Wow.
And, man, I'll never forget those things.
Highlights are something that God gives us, like little snapshots of, when I go back through, it tears me up to think about how good God's been. I'm 41, you're 33. In our short time, God's let us see some things that some people will go their whole ministry and never see or experience. And when I first saw the question, it's like, Burlington or, looking at,
Has to be extended, has to be big.
Right. That's right.
Or, I remember the Friday night, Kenny Baldwin was here last week, and we were talking about the Friday night of youth night at Burlington when there was like 5,000 people there. He preached like a wild man. There was
man.
so much
I
God
was
in that
there.
place.
Unbelievable.
You know, I remember that picture, and we knew in that moment God gave us enough wisdom to know this is a moment. And we took a picture of all of us together around the pulpit. Just, I mean, hundreds of people around that altar that got saved that night. But in all honesty and sincerity, like a highlight in my mind, I have to go to a Carolina rally we did at Temple. And the congregation is singing How Marvelous, How Wonderful. And we're just, I mean, it's just soft and congregation music, and the whole church is singing. And the choir is huge behind us, and I look over at Tucker. And Tucker's got big old tears running down his cheeks. You know, he's at the time probably 10 years old. And I look over, and little Tucker's got tears streaming down his eyes, and, you know, he's too young to fake it, or, you know. And I remember going, I said, "Son, what's wrong?" And he said, "Daddy, ain't nothing wrong." He said, "God's so good to us." He said, "The Lord's here, ain't he, Daddy?" You know, and
You said he is now.
you know, and I thought, my God, you know, if I can do this and my kids see it real,
Boys see God. Amen.
you know. And Siler and Everly are younger, and they're asking questions now, you know. Everly the other night, "Daddy, am I going to go to hell?" You know, and just those questions are starting. And, you know, if I was a hyper soul winner, I would have said, "Repeat this prayer after me." But I you know, I want God to
Right. And he
reach
will.
them. And so it's when I would think of highlights, yes, there's the big meetings. Yes, there's the thousands of people. Yes, there's Arise. Who would have ever thought that would go from 200 kids at a camp to almost 5,000 at, you know, Pigeon Forge?
Sure.
But all of those moments pale in comparison to see my own kids falling in love with Jesus and learn how to worship. You know, we do chapel. As a matter of fact, we got to be fast because we do chapel in here. I went and preached somewhere a while back, and the pastor said, "Hey, can you come preach the chapel at our Christian school in the morning?" And Tucker jumps ahead. He said, "Y'all do chapel? Y'all do chapel?" Yeah, I was like, "Yeah, we do chapel." He said, "What's your setup?" You know, Tucker, he's like, "You know, how do y'all do it?" You guys like, "Well, you know, we sing and we have a preacher preach." He's like, "Do y'all cry?"
Make sure it's good.
Tucker's like, "You know, at our chapel, like Dad makes sure we sing the good songs, like the same stuff we do in church, we do it in chapel." And he said, "You know, and we'll start thinking about how good God is, and we'll get on the altar." He said, "And I'll look around." He said, "And I'll find kids that ain't crying, and I'll go get them to pray with me till they cry too." So his brain don't understand at all.
You better get involved.
But he's already in a little evangelist trying to stir little fires in the
You ain't
school.
gonna sit there dead, neither.
Yeah. So
we may hit this real quick, but what is a common criticism that y'all receive?
this is easy for me. It's probably my category. Is people that don't understand, people that don't know us, you know, would say, what's the emotionalism, or, you know, like when Burlington happened, you know, people that don't know us, it wasn't there, said like it was manufactured.
Yeah.
That we pumped it up, you know. But to that, I would say, if I can do that,
Do it every
why
week.
didn't it happen the second time? And why don't it happen everywhere I go?
Why don't we do it now? Yeah.
If I had the ability to do that,
Yeah, you'd be doing it every Sunday.
you know what I mean? If I had the ability to manifest and 3,000 to 5,000 people every night, would I not continue to do that?
Yeah.
You know what I
get it.
mean?
I get it.
You know, there are so many different worlds out there, and the way people do things. You know, we were trained and taught, you know, just to let God do what He does, and so that means sometimes we may worship for an hour. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And to people that are rigid in their, you know, worship.
Right.
I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just what they're used to. They sing, you know, you could set a watch by what's going to happen at their church
Right.
every week.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Or
3 songs.
They're going to sing 2 songs, announcements, offering, preach. You know, to them, I could almost understand how they look at that and think it's charismatic, or, you know, and the danger is letting someone like that criticize you who you don't want to be them. Like I think for me to accept criticism, sometimes you have to value what they have or you know what I mean? That's not the right way to say it, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like the people that would, I don't want formalism, right? And so, you know, like
what they're criticizing is you've not have a desire to change anyway.
Yeah. Somebody criticized the Rise one time and said, "Man, them kids just all up on the altars and they just stay," you know. And me and Jonathan were talking. He's like, "Isn't that what we want?" Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like he said, at some point in time, we got to realize that we got two different goals here. Mm-hmm. You know, like, yes, I want to preach to them, and yes, I want them to hear, but I also want to get them out of their comfort zones at home and away from their bad friends at home and get them here and let the Holy Ghost soften their heart. And you know, in my early days, the men that I was around, you know, the same way that music was used through David in the life of Saul, I've always sought the worship time, especially with young people, to be like a tenderizer where all them layers that's on the hearts of those kids, man, we sing and we worship and it peels back those layers until the Holy Ghost, you know, gets to their heart. Yep. So and if I got to sing an hour, if we sing 10 minutes, you know what I mean? Whatever we got to do to get those walls tore down. Yep. And so some people that don't understand that or have never been around that, you know, they just sing forever. They just, you know, and just because we don't do what you do doesn't mean what we do is wrong.
I get it.
On top of that, I don't know anybody in our world, because for that opinion to be validated would mean we'd have to be the biggest scam artist in the world, that we want a fake church. You know, I don't know any of you or any of us that operate that want a fake environment.
No.
You know what I mean? Or want to do, you know what I mean?
Right.
I want to follow the Lord. You know what I mean? And I'm more careful about that here at church because there is a great importance, I believe, as a pastor, that the Word of God goes forth.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge sometimes because, man, God's moving, people's on the altar, and you almost feel like, okay, you know, I got to tell everybody we're going to preach now. But really, at victory, I mean, the music's so good. I mean, you could keep going every week. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
you could.
So it's hard to really discern the difference between good and God.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. And he lets you know in that moment.
And they criticize really what they don't know.
So criticism that
kind of what they don't know.
Yeah.
If they would know the inside.
Justin Pratt said at Lead last year, people that know you the least talk about you the most.
Yeah. I was here. That's
you
great.
Know? And so most of my criticisms is around music. You know, like I've went to great lengths to try to cover myself financially, like a board of directors, and at the church here, I've got a finance finance company in Atlanta that audits the books every month and takes care of everything. And I don't, you know, with CTM or with church, like I can't write checks. I can't. I've done everything I can to do that. I've never had any accusations with women. You know, I take Becky about everywhere I go, and everywhere, even if she's not there, I brag on the amazing wife I have.
Sure.
You know, doctrinally, I'm right down the line Baptist doctrine, but music-wise, it's probably been music and worship has been
the criticism for you.
Yeah.
I think, well, if you have amen, if you have a ministry at all with music, it is a fine line, and you have three options. You can make them happy, or you can make them happy, or you can make him happy.
Yeah.
And I've made my decision.
Yeah.
And it's not either one on the left or the right. I'm going right down the middle, and that's my most common criticism is going to be, sadly, from inside the four walls of the church.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm not making him happy. But I'm making him happy. But if I'm making him happy, I'm not making him happy. Yeah. Well, brother or sister, you better just hunker down and serve God, because it's coming.
Yeah.
You're going to upset somebody or make somebody mad, if you want to be more extravagant about it. But your goal is to please God and not a man. You're serving God, not man, and God's providing for you, not man. He may use men, but it's all coming from the Lord. And I know nothing about my old life friends. Say, man, we remember who you are. I hear those testimonies. I don't know nothing about them. I don't know anything about a family member being like, man, are you sure you into that God stuff? I've heard those testimonies, but I know nothing. All my criticism has come from that preacher over there or that preacher over there or this circle or that circle. And if you want to live a miserable life, listen to them.
Yeah, it'll
and let it
rattle
tear
you.
you apart, because it absolutely will.
And I've done things that I regret.
Oh, I
you know what I mean?
too.
Like, there's been, looking back, and me and you've talked about this, one of my flaws is in the studio, you know, we'll have a song. And I've put things in place where I try not to do this anymore, but you get in the studio with these amazing players and they play it and you're like, that's great, but that'd be so much better if you did this or if you did that.
Make it louder.
And man, before you know it, when you get it back, it's like, you know, and so now, like, I had to go into it, but I've done things to keep myself, because I know that about me.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to music, you got to know your crowd and what is, and you also got to, you know, the whole thing about drums or no drums. You know, I've heard the arguments, but it's like,
They are in the Bible, though.
can you show me in that Bible where, you know, so I want to do it right and I want to be biblical, but I also don't want to be confined to somebody's opinion or preference.
Yeah. Is it glorifying? Is it edifying?
Yeah. And once you really get over their opinions and you get into like a victory, like that stuff doesn't matter here.
Right.
You know, people are just like,
I
let's go
think
to
that's
church.
the key with the question about evangelism, because you're traveling to so many different places.
Changes
It's hard
every
to
week.
please everybody.
Oh, yeah. So we would go to these
Every week.
places and these places, and they could not use a set of drums or a soundtrack, but they could sing a contemporary song
Right.
with just piano,
Right.
Yeah.
and everybody's fine with it.
Yeah.
Whereas here, I can use drums on anything, but if I would sing that contemporary song, I'd be labeled and marked as a, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's almost like Amish communities where there's one priest has a different thing over here. I mean, it literally is.
Yeah.
Right.
Like anybody, let's sit down and not attack each other, but have an intellectual conversation about this. And we would have to come down to the fact that it's tribalism and preferential.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I do not want my music to sound like a rock concert. You know, I want to be in the middle. I don't. There are other places that are doing the contemporary stuff. I don't want to be that, but I don't want to be over here either. I want to have freedom to follow the Lord, and if a song has God on it and the words are doctrinal and it's not biblically wrong, you know, the song "Goodness of God." We had people when we did that Arise, man, y'all shouldn't do that. You know,
And we don't sing it at our church.
yeah.
It's just the decision that was made. And the next church I go to next week, they're going to sing it.
Yeah.
And I enjoy it. I've sang it.
Well, I mean, you had a conversation about that. Like, we looked at it like, let's look at these words. You
Right.
know, like,
And yet I respect my pastor's decision.
yeah.
You know, I'm not like, man, we're singing that.
Yeah.
It'd be perfect right here, but we can't sing it. No, I respect it all. You have to learn in evangelism. You have to learn how to respect each of those men's convictions, preference, whatever you want.
And at Arise, like we've you know, Arise, I do not want Arise to be controversial, you know, and we've even talked about Arise this year. You know, we want the music to be
Right down the line.
right down the line, and so there you go.
Well, hey, let's
we could
move into this, because you're already on it.
All right.
You're talking about differences traveling and then difference of what happens here.
That's true. Yeah.
So, what's the biggest difference now preaching? You've already kind of covered the music side, but preaching on the road versus here at Victory, pastoring.
I think when I'm on the road now, I find myself sliding into a place where I'm at times can be more pastoral, like because I know what I do here and I know what people are going through, and I find myself relating to that in other churches. And I've had pastors say that I'm more helpful to that since I've started pastoring. But at the same time, it's kind of funny and interesting to me, like when we do the tent crusade in Somerton. You know, I feel like under the tent, there's an atmosphere where people from the church here go hear me there, and they're like, "Who was that guy?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
What gear was that?
you know, Becky calls it my tent voice. I don't know what it is. There's just a special anointing.
Well, and I think here probably, right, you're probably more focused on the longevity of the member.
Yeah.
Like with the tent meeting, it goes a week, 2 weeks, God bless, whatever. But you got 2 weeks with those people. Well, when you stand behind Victory, this is not a 2-week thing. Like this is not even a 2-year thing.
This is a
like you're thinking,
365.
what I'm giving my members, right? What I'm giving them is eternal. Like as long as God lets them live and join here, I am pouring into their Christian life forever.
In this pulpit, we're on the stage right now. In this pulpit, I'm building.
Right.
Right.
Growth.
At the Crusades, I am reaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I do some of that here too.
Sure.
But I would feel like those are probably the differences in the evangelist and the pastor.
That's what I was going to ask you specifically, Sunday morning. And I'm sure there are times, whether it's Holy Ghost audible in a sermon or whether that's where the Lord's been leading you all week. But do you predominantly see yourself more preaching evangelistically Sunday mornings?
There was a time when I started that I probably would have, but God has taught me in this that it don't matter if I'm in Genesis, Exodus,
Or John.
Jonah,
Genesis or
John, or Revelation.
His word goes
His
out.
word is powerful enough
I agree.
that you preach that word, and it's amazing to me that I can preach a sermon to Christians only about marriage or about, and somebody gets saved.
I'm with it.
So it's
Preach the word.
It's his word. It's not my stories. It's not my charisma. It's not my
Passion.
education. It's not passion. It is the word of God that can seed in someone's heart. And
I'm with that. Well, with this last question, what advice, we've been talking about evangelism, specifically this cast. So what is the advice that you would give someone who's following the call of God in evangelism? Now, and not just, because we did kind of touch on the new, someone new. What about someone that's been doing it for a long time? What about someone who is older? What about, so what advice would you give an evangelist at this point in time? Just any advice at all.
I'll go first, and then y'all can answer or say amen, whatever you want. I'm getting hungry. We need to eat, right?
Right.
But
Amen.
it's real simple. Like, I've always looked at life and ministry like an umbrella. That God has, I'm a big guy on spiritual authority. I believe in it. That there's an umbrella, and so let me say this: if I had a regret as a young evangelist, I would not have labeled or branded my ministry as C.T. Townsend Ministries, right? Because it's all about him. It's his name. And I understand why they say that. But there ain't one desire in my heart for that to be, when I started off, I didn't know what to do. One of my mentors was Ralph Sexton, and he had Ralph Sexton Ministries. So what did I do? There was Greg Lentz and Greg Lentz Ministries. So what did I do? C.T. Townsend Ministries. I didn't, what do I, Salt and Light Ministry? I didn't know. It wasn't like,
Right.
So people will take that and try to make, but it's never been that. It's not about me. So that would be a regret. But in that, and I said that because sometimes a C.T. Townsend Ministries sounds like it's not local church, right? That they're doing their own thing.
Yeah, that's where you're going.
But I believe, I'm a local church guy, and I believe every evangelist, every ministry person should be under the umbrella, under the auspices of a local New Testament Bible-believing church. Right after Burlington, there's some guys. That CT don't even tithe, which was great. I rejoice. Pastor, could you please produce a statement that proves my faithful? So I'm not a rogue agent.
Right.
I have, whether it was under my dad or under Larry Brown or under Ralph Sexton or under Steve Hurt, I've always had a pastor and submitted myself to that local church.
Sure.
And I've always, since I was a kid, I've been a tither, right? And to be under the umbrella of that local church, under the authority of that pastor, is a huge deal. Because I believe when you get out of the umbrella of that, God knows what he's doing. There are winds and adversity that you can't handle outside of the umbrella. I've always looked at like the wind of the world coming, and that pastor was holding that umbrella. And as long as I stayed behind him, you know, I was shielded from the winds of this world. And if I want to step out on my own and go rogue and try to create a door for myself, I can. But you're on that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've always felt there's great blessings from operating under the headship and the umbrella that God has for your life.
I mean, speaking of that, me and you was at a meeting together, and we was hanging out. The meeting was over. A guy had come up to talk to us, mainly you, but I was there with you. And so he came up and talked to you. He was kind of introducing himself, kind of wanting to give the business card and all those things, and tell you who he was. He was kind of evangelist, sung some. He had a guitar, and so he was wanting a start, or wanting some help, or wanting some meetings, you know. And it was all said and done, and when it was all over, me and you talked about it. I said, so what do you think? And he would ask him, one of the questions was, what church you go to? Like one of the questions CTA, I was there. He said, you know, who's your pastor? Well, I don't really have one, right? You know, I'm kind of doing my own thing, like you just talked about. Like he said, well, what church you go to? And he was like, well, you know, I'm kind of in between. You know, the guy didn't go to church. The guy didn't have a pastor, but he's wanting to be.
He's a traveler.
So when it was all said and done, it was over. I said, so what do you think? And you looked at me and you said, no, I'm weary of that. I said, what? He said, no, any guy that doesn't have a pastor or a local church is not under that. He said, I'm weary of that.
Mm-hmm. It's not doctrinal. It's not biblical. I think
it just was made you nervous.
There's been guys we've known that I've looked at them and said, you need to get under pastor. Mm-hmm. You don't need to travel right now. You need to go serve and submit yourself and humble yourself to a pastor and learn there, and then let God send you out. And they didn't listen. They didn't develop roots, right? And it's been a mess since.
Yeah.
So I think advice to a young guy is get in that pasture before God ever going to let you lead. He's going to teach you to follow.
Amen.
And let God open the doors. Turn your phone off.
Yeah.
Out calls.
Yeah.
Let the
outgoing.
incoming. Yeah.
Right.
Let it be.
Let the incoming calls come. And when you go to a church, don't go in there like you're a celebrity or you know. But you're a servant. Yeah. You go in that place to be a servant to that preacher, to that pastor, to that church.
You have a 2-minute answer for that?
Yeah. Well, no. My advice, and I kind of hit it on earlier. You know, my advice is just be available. Mm-hmm. We call it faithfulness, but there's a lot of things under faithfulness, right? We can be a faithful giver and this and that. My thing is, for my advice, whether you're young or whether you're old, just be available for God to use. When he showed up and talked to Isaiah, and he said, whom shall I send, whom will go?
Here am I.
Yeah, he said, here am I. He was just ready for the job. Not even saying, he even said, I'm unclean. He's like, I'm not sure if I'm the best guy for the job, but I'm available. Yeah. So I've always said this, be the guy, be the book on the shelf that when God's ready to use, ready to read, he'll grab that book, right? Don't. So, and just be ready, just be available. Yeah. That has been the best thing that's helped me.
Amen. So my 2-minute answer, the church was your answer. Faithful to your church, faithful to your call, your availability. And I'll leave us off with be faithful to your character. Mm-hmm. Don't forget who you are.
Yeah.
And don't try to be someone else.
Yeah.
That's why God called you.
Yeah.
He needs you. He don't need another duplicate of that. Mm-hmm. He doesn't need another Joe Arthur. He doesn't need another CT or Travis. He needs a Jared.
Yeah.
Sure.
So preach how God gives it to you.
Yeah.
Preach it the way God gives it to you.
Yeah.
If you don't slobber, spit, and hack and sweat, you're still preaching. Mm-hmm. You ain't got to do it like everybody else. Be true to yourself. That's why God called you. He wants you. So
yeah, I like it.
I love it.
The church, the call, the character.
I went to Preacher Brown one time before all the evangelism broke out. I could feel God stirring in my heart to go do something. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go preach so bad. And I couldn't even get Becky to listen to me preach. You know what I mean? Like, it was terrible. And I went to Preacher Brown's office downstairs, and I said, man, it had affected my spirit. And I said, preacher, I need to apologize to you. He said, what for, son? I said, I have surrendered to be a missionary. I've surrendered to be a pastor. I've surrendered to be, everything. I've surrendered to do anything and everything except serve the Lord and push a vacuum cleaner here at Victory. I said, I need to apologize to you for that. It's not fair to you that I'm not all in. I said, and I want you to know that I'm making a conscious decision today that if God never lets me do another thing, I will happily serve the Lord here
Be
at
all
this
in.
place. And be, and he cried and I cried. And he said, son, you ain't got nothing to worry about with that. He said, I love you. And God's going to use you in time. Just be faithful where you're at. And looking back, it wasn't no time after that my phone started ringing. And it was like literally God was waiting for my heart to get into a place where I could faithfully serve in that place and be myself and be available.
Yep.
So we hope that this has been helpful to you today. Hope it's been some great content. And if we can help you, info or one thing at cttownsend.com. You can send us emails if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to talk about. But I really appreciate Travis Kiriluk being here.
Privilege.
And any pastor that's watching this, Travis will be a blessing to you as well as Jared Dixon. We love you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Love
being a friend. Thank you for what you do for the cause of Christ. And we love you guys. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank
One
y'all.
Thing podcast. God bless you. Have a great day.